In the halls of power, nothing is as it seems. They schemed, plotting in silence, in shadows. Every banquet hides a secret. Every smile could be a lie. They killed, not always openly, but in ways history often forgot. And she walked a path where every glance, every word, every breath could decide her life or her death. Caught in the middle of power, a queen's life was never her own. Every alliance, every marriage, every heir she bore could tip the balance of kingdoms or seal her fate. In the courts of kings and emperors, women were rarely allowed to choose their own fate. Their lives, their marriages, their very bodies were tools of diplomacy, weapons in silent wars, and prizes in the relentless game of succession. They were the threads that held alliances together, the pawns whose movements determined whether kingdoms thrived or fell into chaos. Few were born to rule, most were born to serve the ambitions of others. Consider the life of Catherine of Aragon. A princess of Spain, she was betrothed not for love, but for politics. Her marriage to Henry VIII of England was intended to cement alliances between nations and ensure the continuation of dynastic lines. Every smile she offered, every courtly bow, every appearance at a royal gathering was calculated to maintain her position, to serve the ambitions of her husband, and to fulfill the expectations of her father, Ferdinand II. The love that might have been her own concern was entirely secondary to the strategic calculus of power. She entered her marriage carrying the weight of her homeland's hopes, the crown's demands, and the ceaseless expectations that she produce in heir. In this life, personal desire was a luxury. Every woman in succession understood that fertility was not merely private, it was political. The ability to bear children, especially sons, was a commodity more valuable than gold or armies. Infertility, miscarriages, or the birth of daughters instead of sons could brand a queen as defective, weak, or unfit to rule. Rivalries were constant, often invisible. Women were measured against one another not for beauty alone, but for their ability to survive the relentless pressure of the court. A sister might be a threat, a cousin might be an enemy. Even the queen herself could be her own greatest competitor, her own harshest judge. This was not unique to Europe. In the Ottoman Empire, princesses and concubines were central to the political strategies of the Sultan. Their marriages or positions within the harem were carefully orchestrated to strengthen alliances, secure loyalty, or produce heirs who would continue the dynasty. The harem was not merely a place of seclusion, it was a political arena where women wielded subtle, often invisible power. Influence could be gained through favor with the sultan, through careful management of relationships, or through strategic births. But the stakes were immense. A single misstep, an unguarded word, a perceived slight could result in exile, imprisonment, or death. Every action was watched, every conversation analyzed, every gesture interpreted. Across the Mughal Empire, daughters of emperors were often married into other powerful families to cement political alliances. These arrangements were rarely about love or personal choice. They were carefully calculated moves in a chess game of empire. A princess might leave the palace of her birth at a young age, sent hundreds of miles to marry a ruler she had never met, expected to adjust seamlessly to a foreign court, a foreign language, and a foreign culture. Her value was measured in political gain, her happiness a secondary concern. Yet, even in these circumstances, women found ways to influence events, to wield subtle power and to leave their mark on history, though their efforts were often hidden from chroniclers. Imagine for a moment the inner life of one such princess preparing for an arranged marriage. She wakes before dawn, not for leisure or reflection, but to dress in ceremonial attire that signals her family's status, their wealth, and their influence. Every piece of jewelry, every embroidery stitch, every color chosen is a statement.
She eats in silence, aware that even a wrong word might carry consequences. Her mind is a battlefield of anticipation, anxiety, and the relentless understanding that her value is defined not by her intelligence, wit, or creativity, but by her ability to secure her family's position and produce heirs. She is watched constantly. Tutors, advisors, and servants observe her behavior, noting even the smallest deviations from decorum. Courtiers whisper behind screens and tapestries, analyzing her reactions and reporting back to the king or emperor. Her father and mother monitor her carefully, not merely for health or education, but for signs of temperament, disposition, and potential obedience. Every decision she makes, every emotion she allows herself, is a reflection not only on herself, but on the fate of her family and the alliances they have cultivated over generations. Marriage day arrives not with celebration, but with weight. The princess steps into a carriage or across palace halls, aware that she is crossing a threshold from one life into another, a life where she will have limited autonomy, where her body becomes a tool for dynastic continuity, where her emotional and physical labor will be measured against political objectives. The groom, often a stranger, represents power, authority, and expectations that have nothing to do with love. Every glance he gives is analyzed. Every word he utters is recorded in the invisible ledger of court politics. Within the marriage, pressure only intensifies. Fertility is paramount, but it is not guaranteed. The princess faces the possibility of repeated miscarriages or years of failed conception. Each month without an heir is a test of endurance, a challenge to her very survival in the court. Rival women, sisters-in-law, concubines, distant cousins watch closely, ready to seize opportunity should misfortune befall her. The court itself becomes a battlefield, one in which knowledge, charm, and careful negotiation are weapons just as deadly as swords on the battlefield. This theme repeats across empires. In Europe, Catherine of Aragon endured immense pressure to bear a male heir. In the Ottoman Empire, consorts of the Sultan navigated the complex hierarchies of the harem, where influence was transient and danger constant. In the Mughal Empire, daughters married to distant rulers learned quickly that diplomacy was not a skill taught in books, but lived in every gesture, every word, every carefully measured smile. Across continents and centuries, women were indispensable to dynastic strategy, yet consistently denied personal freedom or recognition. What often goes unnoticed, however, is the subtle power these women could exercise. Even within rigid systems, they found ways to influence outcomes. Letters smuggled between allies, whispered advice to husbands, mediation between warring factions. These were the invisible threads through which women shaped the political landscape. But such influence was precarious. One miscalculation could erase them from history as swiftly as an executed rival or a poisoned cup. Chroniclers, often men writing to glorify kings, frequently ignored these contributions, leaving us only fragments of their courage, strategy, and intelligence. The psychological toll was immense. To navigate these treacherous waters, a princess had to master duplicity, to read the intentions of those around her with acute perception, and to conceal her fears and frustrations behind a mask of composure. Every failure, real or imagined, was amplified in a court that tolerated no weakness. Social survival required constant vigilance, acute self-awareness, and unwavering adherence to a set of rules that were often invisible but universally enforced. The stakes were not limited to survival within the court, they extended to the very continuation of dynasties. A woman's inability to bear children could destabilize alliances, trigger wars, and invite rivals to claim the throne. In some cases, women were blamed for circumstances beyond their control, scapegoated for the political ambitions of men, or punished for outcomes that history would later record as accidents of fate. Even when women succeeded, their triumphs were fleeting and often unrecognized. A successful marriage that produced heirs might solidify alliances, yet the woman herself would rarely be credited for her role. Her influence was invisible by design, deliberately omitted from historical accounts. She existed as a means to an end, her achievements measured by the survival and prosperity of those she served rather than her own intellect, courage, or ingenuity. This pattern across continents, cultures, and centuries reveals a brutal reality. Women in royal succession were invaluable, yet expendable. Their lives were defined by duty, surveillance, and unrelenting expectation. Their stories were rarely recorded, and when they were often sanitized to protect the reputations of men. Yet, through careful reading of letters, diaries, and historical accounts, we glimpse the lives of these women, the stakes they bore, and the quiet, invisible ways in which they shaped history. As we move deeper into this story, we will see how these pressures transformed women into not only pawns, but players, how jealousy, rivalry, and fear within royal households shaped lives and deaths, how subtle intelligence, courage, and patience allowed some women to survive, influence, and leave their mark on history, even when their names were destined to fade into shadow.
In royal courts, danger was not always wielded with swords. Sometimes it came cloaked in silk and whispers, in polite smiles and quiet gestures. Women within royal households were both companions and competitors, allies and enemies. They shared halls, meals, and even beds with one another, yet trust was a rare luxury. Jealousy and fear were constant companions, shaping lives in ways few outside the palace could imagine. Sibling rivalries were perhaps the most perilous. Sisters born into power were expected to cooperate, to maintain the family's position and uphold dynastic unity. But when succession and favor were scarce, rivalry was inevitable. In the European courts, especially during the Wars of the Roses, princesses and queens often found themselves in competition for influence, marriage alliances, or the crown itself. Alliances shifted like shadows, and the slightest misstep could tip a sister from favor to disgrace, or worse. Imagine two royal sisters preparing for a council meeting, each acutely aware of her own position and the subtle advantages her sibling might hold. One sister observes her younger sister's attire, noting the richer embroidery and finer jewels, understanding that every detail is a calculated display of wealth, influence, and potential favor with the king. Each greeting exchanged, each word spoken is measured for tone and implication. A compliment might be a subtle insult, a smile might conceal resentment or ambition. This dynamic extended beyond sisters to cousins, aunts, and daughters. Rivalries were not born from petty envy alone, they were survival strategies. In courts where male heirs determined the future, women's access to power was mediated through marriage, fertility, and influence over men who ruled. A well-placed whisper to a king, a carefully timed letter to a nobleman, or a subtle public gesture could elevate a woman's status or seal her doom. Some rivalries turned deadly. Queen Margaret of Anjou during the Wars of the Roses famously maneuvered against rival factions, including women within her extended family, to protect her son's claim to the throne. Her opponents were not only men, but women whose marriages, loyalties, and influence posed threats to her objectives. Alliances and betrayals were often negotiated through female networks, and the consequences were high: exile, imprisonment, or death. Even within a single palace, women could endanger each other. A jealous sister might whisper falsehoods to the king, framing another for misdeeds she never committed. A cousin might spread rumors of infertility or inappropriate behavior to undermine a rival's marriage prospects. Concubines and wives of rulers learned quickly that subtle influence could be as dangerous as open rebellion. Every action, every word, and every gesture could be weaponized in the ruthless politics of succession. Take the case of Isabella of Castile and her sister-in-law, Joanna of Portugal.
Their interactions were fraught with tension, balancing loyalty to family with personal ambition and the ever-present shadow of dynastic expectations. Isabella's eventual rise to power was influenced not only by her own skill and intelligence, but by her ability to navigate these rivalries, turning potential threats into opportunities for alliance. Meanwhile, other women in the household, less adept or less fortunate, were marginalized or erased from historical memory. Strategic alliances among women could be a double-edged sword. A whispered pact to support one sister over another might provide temporary advantage, but betrayal was always possible. Loyalty was conditional, contingent on survival and ambition. A woman who sought to protect her children, secure her husband's favor, or ensure her own position had to constantly assess who could be trusted, who could be persuaded, and who might exploit a moment of vulnerability. These rivalries were not limited to Europe. In the Ottoman harem, women jostled for influence over the sultan and the favor of his advisors. Mothers of potential heirs worked tirelessly to secure positions for their sons, often at the expense of other women. Alliances were temporary, power fleeting, and mistakes could be fatal. Similarly, Mughal princesses navigated complex hierarchies, balancing the expectations of their fathers, husbands, and brothers, while maintaining a delicate web of loyalty and influence. What emerges from these histories is a stark truth. For women in royal succession, the palace was a battlefield, and the weapons were subtlety, intelligence, and ambition. Their enemies were not only men seeking power, but other women competing for survival in a system that afforded them influence but demanded perfection. Every conversation, every gesture, every calculated display of composure could determine whether a woman ascended to prominence or vanished from favor. Yet rivalry was not merely destructive, it also honed strategy, diplomacy, and resilience. Women learned to read others, to anticipate threats, and to leverage relationships to their advantage. Some became masterful negotiators, shaping policy, mediating disputes, and influencing decisions from behind the scenes. Even when history ignored their names, their actions rippled across dynasties, subtly altering the course of empires. The danger, the jealousy, the subtle warfare, all of it was constant. Sisters, wives, daughters, and rivals were bound together by blood, proximity, and circumstance, yet divided by ambition and necessity. In a palace where trust was scarce, loyalty uncertain, and power finite, every interaction carried weight. For those who survived, skillful navigation of these relationships could secure influence, or even succession. For those who faltered, it could mean disgrace, exile, or death. These lives of these women reveal a hidden layer of history. While chronicles often focus on kings, battles, and treaties, the intricate struggles of queens, princesses, and noblewomen shaped the political landscape in ways rarely acknowledged. They managed alliances, undermined rivals, and safeguarded their families' claims, all while constrained by social expectation and the constant scrutiny of the court. Understanding these dynamics allows us to see succession not simply as a question of inheritance, but as a complex web of relationships, rivalries, and strategic maneuvering. It's a world where sisters could be enemies, cousins could be threats, and wives had to navigate every step with caution. The stakes were immense, and the consequences of failure could be permanent. As we explore further, we will see that these rivalries often escalated into overt danger, where women were removed through exile, mysterious deaths, or orchestrated scandals. The palace, while a place of opulence and ceremony, was also a crucible of ambition and fear. Here, the most powerful weapon was knowledge, and those who controlled information often controlled life and death itself. In this world, every smile concealed intent. Every whispered compliment might mask a threat. Every gesture of obedience could be interpreted as submission or weakness. Sisters, wives, daughters, and rivals navigated these treacherous waters daily, their survival dependent on insight, cunning, and an unerring sense of timing. By examining these relationships, we gain insight not only into the strategies of women in succession, but also into the fragile, dangerous balance of power that shaped entire kingdoms. Their lives were intricate, perilous, and extraordinary, and their stories, though often hidden, reveal the human cost of dynastic ambition.
For women born into royal dynasties, danger rarely arrived announced with drums or swords. The most lethal threats were often subtle, concealed behind silken curtains, whispered messages, or a smile that hid a dagger. Succession was a battlefield where power was measured not only in armies, but in influence, alliances, and the ability to eliminate rivals quietly. Women at the center of these struggles were uniquely vulnerable, objects of ambition, envy, and fear, often removed violently or covertly from the game of power. Their fates were frequently sealed by mechanisms invisible to the public, leaving only rumors, hushed whispers, and fragmented chronicles as evidence. Anne Boleyn's rise and fall exemplifies the peril of being too close to power. When she married Henry VIII in 1533, she became the focus of England's political and religious upheaval. Her marriage was a victory for her family and their allies, a strategic move that defied papal authority and sparked a new religious order. Yet her inability to produce a male heir, combined with the jealousy of rivals and the unpredictable temper of the king, rendered her position precarious. By 1536, Anne was imprisoned in the Tower of London, accused of adultery, incest, and treason. While modern historians debate the veracity of these charges, contemporary accounts make clear that political expediency, not justice, dictated her fate. Her execution by beheading was swift, but the weeks leading to it were a period of tension, fear, and uncertainty that must have weighed on her constantly. Imagine her perspective during those days. Confined within the cold stone walls of the tower, every step echoed ominously. Letters were delivered with mechanical precision, each one carrying instructions that could dictate her survival or doom. Servants, though outwardly loyal, were conduits of rumor, their eyes and ears extensions of a court eager for her downfall. Every knock at the door, every shadow passing the window could signify either deliverance or the approach of executioners. She had to navigate these dangers carefully, maintaining composure while knowing that any misstep, any perceived arrogance or despair might accelerate her death. But Anne's story is not unique. Across the centuries and continents, women in royal succession faced similar threats, often disappearing entirely from records. In the Ottoman Empire, concubines of the Sultan wielded influence only as long as they remained favored. Those who fell out of favor were sometimes quietly removed from the harem, their fates unrecorded, leaving historians only with hints of their existence. Their disappearance served as a stark warning. Power was transient, and the cost of losing it could be erasure from history itself. Even exile was a tool of control. Royal daughters or widowed queens could be summoned to distant palaces or convents, ostensibly for safety or propriety, while in reality, these relocations severed their influence, isolated them from allies, and placed them at the mercy of those seeking to consolidate power. Letters summoning a princess to a distant court, written in elegant calligraphy, could carry more menace than the sharpest blade. The act of leaving the familiar palace, the garden she had known since childhood, and the networks of loyalty she had cultivated was not just inconvenient, it was a stripping of agency, a methodical reduction of her power. Consider the tragic fate of Grand Duchess Anastasia of Russia. Following the Russian Revolution, she and her family were executed by Bolshevik forces. The manner of their deaths was violent, indiscriminate, and final. But rumors persisted for decades that she had survived, highlighting the uncertainty and fear that surrounded the disappearance of royal women. Even in this extreme case, the threat to women in succession was both political and symbolic. Eliminating the female members of the royal family removed potential focal points for loyalty and resistance, consolidating power for the new regime. Rumors of poisoning were another common weapon. In European courts, subtle poisonings were often suspected when queens or princesses died unexpectedly or fell gravely ill. Sometimes these suspicions were grounded in reality. Other times they were a reflection of the paranoia that permeated royal life.
The mere fear of poison could dictate behavior, meals carefully prepared and inspected, drinks refused politely but strategically, and alliances evaluated constantly to determine who might benefit from a sudden death. The psychological pressure of this environment was immense, creating a constant undercurrent of anxiety in the daily lives of royal women. Even within their own households, women were not safe. Rival wives, sisters-in-law, and even daughters could play roles in eliminating a perceived threat. In a harem, a favored consort might orchestrate the removal of another woman to secure her own son's future. In European courts, a queen might manipulate the perception of another woman's fertility, morality, or loyalty to ensure her own family's position. These internal rivalries created a landscape in which alliances were temporary and trust rare. A misplaced word or a misunderstood gesture could lead to scandal, imprisonment, or death. The mechanisms of removal, execution, exile, imprisonment, or mysterious death reinforced the patriarchal structure of power. Women, while often at the center of these strategies, were rarely the architects, yet their responses, courage, resilience, and strategic thinking shaped outcomes in ways that history only partially records. Through this lens, we see the full danger of royal life for women. Every meal, every letter, every interaction could conceal threat. Every day required calculation and careful observation. Every smile could hide a plot. Every step through the palace could bring danger. Yet within this perilous existence, women displayed remarkable agency, navigating threats with intelligence and courage even when the consequences of failure were fatal. The story of women removed from succession by poison, exile, or mysterious death is not simply one of tragedy, it is also a story of resilience. Their struggles illuminate the harsh realities of dynastic politics and the gender dynamics of power. Even when removed from sight, their influence, their absence, and their endurance shaped the course of history, leaving legacies that resonate across centuries.
Behind the grandeur of palaces and the glittering veneer of royal ceremonies lay secrets that few outsiders ever glimpsed. Letters hidden in drawers, diaries tucked away in libraries, and whispered rumors in dim corridors revealed conspiracies that threatened queens, princesses, and noblewomen throughout history. These documents, often overlooked or deliberately suppressed by chroniclers, expose a darker reality. The lives of women in succession were never secure, even when their names appeared in the annals of history. Consider the letters of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her correspondence with allies and confidants hinted at threats to her life and position that were concealed from the public. In one letter, she detailed suspicions of plots orchestrated by those close to her court, noblemen and women alike, seeking to undermine her authority or hasten her removal from power. These were not idle fears, they were grounded in political reality. Each revelation carried immense risk. If intercepted or exposed, the consequences could be fatal, not just for Mary, but for anyone associated with her confidences. Similarly, letters discovered from the Ottoman Empire reveal the delicate and dangerous negotiations taking place within the harem. Concubines and mothers of potential heirs wrote in coded language to each other and to trusted allies, navigating alliances and rivalries in secret. They sought to protect their son's succession, advocate for their own influence, and prevent rivals from seizing power. The tone was careful, measured, and deliberate. Any mistake could lead to immediate exile or worse. These hidden communications show that even in a system dominated by men, women found ways to exercise agency, though it was always fraught with danger. In the Mughal courts of India, princesses and queens maintained diaries and letters that spoke candidly about the power struggles around them. They recorded the manipulations, betrayals, and subtle pressures exerted by their own families, illustrating the constant tension between duty and survival. A diary entry might note the arrival of a courtier bearing news of a rival's favor with the emperor, the careful crafting of alliances to counteract such influence, or the anxiety of attending a ceremonial event where the slightest misstep could be noted and reported. These documents, though often fragmented, provide rare insight into the lived experiences of women navigating the treacherous politics of succession. The danger extended beyond the domestic sphere of the palace.
Across Europe, chroniclers, often men tasked with preserving the dignity of the monarchy, sanitized events to protect the image of kings and emperors. Murders, exiles, and poisonings were occasionally glossed over or attributed to illness, natural causes, or divine will. The stories of women who resisted, survived, or influenced events were minimized or erased entirely. Historians today must read between the lines, reconstructing events from subtle hints, inconsistencies in records, and corroborated rumors. These patterns are consistent across time and geography. In England, queens like Anne Boleyn were subject to accusations carefully crafted to justify their removal. In Russia, the fates of royal daughters were often concealed behind state-sanctioned narratives, masking the intrigues and conspiracies that threatened them. In Asia, Ottoman concubines and Mughal princesses maneuvered in secret, their lives dependent on a combination of intelligence, influence, and constant vigilance. The universality of these patterns underscores a harsh reality. The threat to women in succession was not an anomaly, but an enduring feature of dynastic politics. Imagine reading a forbidden diary from centuries past, the ink faded but the urgency clear. It describes clandestine meetings in hidden rooms, whispered conversations in corridors, and subtle manipulations of the king or emperor. It reveals the ways that a queen or princess could be undermined, how allegiances shifted overnight, and how the balance of power could pivot on a single letter or a carefully timed rumor. Each revelation is a testament to the risks of discovery. A wrong word, a misplaced note, or an overheard conversation could cost a woman her freedom, her status, or her life. For instance, one letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, details suspicions about a trusted lady-in-waiting who might be colluding with foreign powers to weaken her influence. The language is careful, coded, but unmistakable in its urgency. Another document from the Ottoman harem instructs a mother to subtly influence the sultan toward favoring her son, while warning against revealing intentions too openly, knowing that exposure could result in exile or imprisonment. Across empires and centuries, the underlying principle was the same. Information was power, secrecy was survival, and women had to navigate both with skill and courage. Chroniclers often sanitized these stories, deliberately or through omission, to maintain the reputation of the ruling male authorities. But the surviving fragments, letters, diaries, marginal notes in official documents, reveal the depth of the conspiracies women faced. They also highlight the strategies women employed: coded language, secret messengers, and discreet alliances that allowed them to assert influence while minimizing personal risk. Through these subtle acts, they shaped the course of history, even as their contributions were suppressed or ignored in the official record. The universality of these patterns is striking. Across continents from Europe to Asia, the dynamics are remarkably similar. Women were both essential to dynastic stability and inherently vulnerable to removal. They were surveilled, manipulated, and threatened, yet they found ways to exercise agency, to protect their positions, and to advance their interests. The tools of patriarchy, covert threats, controlled marriages, exile, or disappearance were employed consistently to maintain male dominance. Yet within these constraints, women found avenues of resistance, subtle power, and influence that were often unrecorded. By examining these hidden documents and testimonies, we gain insight into the precarious position of women in royal succession. Their lives were defined not only by public ceremonies or official titles, but by the secret struggles behind palace walls. Letters, diaries, and rumors illuminate a world where a misinterpreted glance or a delayed reply could have consequences as severe as execution. Survival demanded intelligence, foresight, and discretion, qualities that allowed some women to navigate conspiracies and preserve their influence, even when the records sought to erase them. Ultimately, the crown's darkest secrets are revealed not in battlefields or coronations, but in these hidden exchanges. They expose the relentless vigilance required of women, the constant negotiation of trust, and the silent, invisible power struggles that defined the lives of queens, princesses, and consorts. These documents remind us that history is rarely the story of rulers alone. It is also the story of those who survived, maneuvered, and influenced events from behind the scenes. In the shadows of the crown, women both suffered and strategized, shaping dynasties while contending with forces that sought to erase them from memory. The letters, diaries, and testimonies that survive are fragments of a much larger hidden narrative. They reveal the intelligence, courage, and resilience required for women to navigate the intricate politics of succession. Even in the absence of public recognition, their actions had consequences, altering the fates of heirs, the outcomes of alliances, and the stability of kingdoms. By studying these documents, we not only uncover conspiracies and threats, but also witness the subtle, enduring influence of women whose stories almost forgot. Across time and empires, one truth remains clear. Women in royal succession were indispensable, yet perpetually at risk. Their lives were a delicate balance of diplomacy, observation, and strategic action. Each letter and diary entry, each whisper and secret meeting revealed the extraordinary lengths they went to survive and protect their families, even as the crown and court conspired against them. In these hidden pages, the crown's darkest secrets come to light, offering a glimpse into a world of peril, power, and resilience that defined the lives of women throughout history.
When we step back from the corridors of power, the palaces, and the battlefields, a clear pattern emerges. The struggles of women in royal succession are neither isolated nor confined to one era or empire. Across centuries, continents, and dynasties, the story repeats itself. Women have consistently been essential to the continuation of empires, yet vulnerable to the whims of ambition, envy, and patriarchal authority. The threats they faced, political manipulation, forced marriages, rivalry, exile, and even death, were not anomalies. They were structural, embedded in the very mechanisms of succession. From Catherine of Aragon navigating the expectations of Henry VIII, to Anne Boleyn's tragic fall, to the concubines of the Ottoman harem, to Mughal princesses writing secret letters in distant palaces, the lessons are strikingly consistent. The instruments of danger may change, letters, poison, exile, but the principle remains. Women in power were both indispensable and expendable. Their lives were a currency in the politics of inheritance, their bodies and choices tied to dynastic survival, their influence real yet often invisible. History also reveals a striking universality in the methods used to control, coerce, or eliminate women from succession. Male authority has been enforced through surveillance, rumor, legal manipulation, and calculated removal from power. But in parallel, women have demonstrated remarkable resilience. They have found subtle ways to negotiate influence, protect heirs, and assert agency, often in environments deliberately structured to erase their contributions. Their strategies, letters written in code, alliances formed quietly, careful observation of rivals, allowed them to survive and shape history, even when chroniclers minimized or ignored their actions. The repetition of these patterns carries a broader lesson. Power and gender are intertwined across human history. Succession is not just the transfer of crowns or titles, it is a measure of human ambition and the fragility of survival for those whose power is contingent on others' approval. While men often occupied the visible seats of authority, women were the architects of alliances, the mediators of disputes, and the protectors of dynasties. Their stories, when read carefully, reveal that authority is never only public. It is negotiated, fought for, and defended in private spaces where the stakes are life and death. Even today, echoes of these historical dynamics can be seen. The politics of inheritance, the negotiation of influence, and the challenges of gendered power continue to shape societies. While crowns may no longer dictate the fate of nations, the tension between authority, ambition, and vulnerability persists in boardrooms, governments, and social hierarchies. The past illuminates the present. Patterns of exclusion, pressure, and strategic maneuvering remain deeply intertwined with gender.
Recognizing this allows us to understand both the courage of women who shaped history and the systemic obstacles they faced. The women of succession, the queens, princesses, and noblewomen whose names were whispered, erased, or minimized, left a legacy that transcends titles. Their resilience, intelligence, and courage shaped dynasties, influenced decisions, and altered the course of empires. Yet their stories often faded into shadow, deliberately or inadvertently obscured by chroniclers and historians focused on kings, battles, and male achievements. Today, by examining their lives closely, we restore their presence to the historical record and acknowledge the profound impact of their agency. Ultimately, succession is more than a historical curiosity. It is a story of human ambition, gendered danger, and survival. It teaches us that power is never absolute, that influence can be both visible and invisible, and that women, despite centuries of marginalization, have played pivotal roles in shaping the world we inherit. By understanding their struggles, we gain insight into the persistent interplay of gender and authority, the delicate balance of ambition and survival, and the repeated dangers that women in power have faced across time. The stories of these women, hidden in letters, diaries, and whispers, remind us that history is not only a record of kings and emperors, it is also a chronicle of those who survived, resisted, and influenced events from the shadows. Their experiences illuminate the human cost of ambition, the fragility of life under scrutiny, and the quiet, enduring power of those who had to navigate peril in order to shape the world. As we reflect on these patterns, the portraits of queens and princesses fade into shadow, not as a symbol of loss, but as a testament to the lives that history almost forgot. In those shadows lie lessons of courage, strategy, and resilience. They remind us that succession is never just about crowns. It is about the lives, ambitions, and risks of those who must navigate the treacherous intersection of power and gender. The story repeats across time and empire, yet it also endures, teaching us that power has always been contested, that gender has always mattered, and that survival, strategic, careful, and courageous, is an enduring testament to human agency.